Trevor Noah once said America is 50 countries masquerading as one. Do you think this is true or false? If so, why? Realistically, America should be about 4 to 6 different nations which are engaged in military pacts/treaties with one another with some form of joint oversight. The needs and priorities of folks in some parts differ so drastically from people in other parts of the country. That's why we had to invent the Electoral College, yet we still have the nerve to consider ourselves a democracy when that system failed long ago. Technically true, I guess, but in practical terms definition not. Having lived in 5 different states, visited nearly all 50, and having friends from all over, I can tell you most places are not that different. Most big cities now are mostly made of transplants from other states, and it's very common and very easy to move to a different state. Most of the barriers to moving are personal or job related. Obviously there are geographic differences that are the biggest cultural drivers. People who want mountains are in Colorado, people who want beaches or surfing are in Florida or California, people in the Midwest. But overall, the culture divide is more prominent between urban vs rural and age groups than it is between states. That's kind of how it was intended when the US was formed. Each state has its own laws and customs. That's why federally, marijuana is not legal, but states can legalize it within themselves. It's why gay marriage, for a long time, was not recognized federally, but states could legalize it within their own laws. It's a good thing too, because most of the time you won't see widespread change in the country until certain states start changing first. California and New York State typically start by changing within their respective state, and then other states follow. Eventually, the Fed gets the message and changes the country as a whole. People shit on the American healthcare system, but so far Massachusetts has come the closest to enacting full-blown healthcare reform. Not exactly successfully though, which is why it hasn't spread yet. You can vote for whatever presidential candidate that has the big changes you want to see, but typically it doesn't work out unless states lead the way by example. That's why you should always pay attention and vote in your local district and state elections. That's where the teeth of change sit. Not so much with the president you vote for. In the event of a natural or national disaster, each state and their lower levels of governance are set up to work as if the Fed didn't exist to an extent. Meaning should Washington DC be removed from the equation, the states could still function for a time, if not indefinitely, until a solution is found. National Guard units are drawn from states and are technically soldiers of that state and are tasked with state-mandated defense and aid. They are federal military and state militia at the same time. But in the last 40 years, federal mandates have made state control of these Guard units fall more and more under federal control. Until 1986, a governor or a state could withhold mobilizing troops for a war if they felt it was not in their interest. And in 2006 the federal passed laws making it legal for the president to directly mobilize Guard units within their states with permission of the governor. So dissolution of state autonomy and power is real, but at varying degrees. Think of it like the Greek city/states of old. Essentially each was independent, but were part of a united Greek world. Then the Romans came along and had a republic. The US is a hybrid model. States are self-governed and only answer to the federal government in federal matters. The federal government is also made up of representatives from those states who vie for federal mandates that are good for their self-governed state. The Fed also has its own police force, FBI, and other agencies that are mirrored in state, county, and city levels. The FBI is supposed to only intervene in multi-state crimes unless called upon. Criminals who cross state lines often become federally hunted criminals because now they are multi-jurisdictional and fall under the umbrella of federal control. Also, each state teaches its own history in schools that are managed by the state rather than the federal. In Georgia you take Georgia history and US history, while in New York you would have a New York-centered history book. Americans of the United States have several loyalties in their social contract. You have your local community, your town/city, your county, your state, and the nation as a whole. Each requires different levels of commitment and taxation, and in response each provides a different level of governance and systems. I'm a geographer. false. I take issue with the masquerading part. If you took 1,000 random small cities across America, they'd be indistinguishable and pretty uniformly boring to look at. They'd look pretty much all the same, sadly. Some states like Texas, Alaska, Hawaii, or California have unique identities that deep separate them apart from the rest. But that's it. Americans for the most part are the same. The states aren't like countries. Some of them are like Texas and California and a few others, but most are more like provinces that every other country has. The states aren't separate enough from US Congress to be country-like. Not really. I suppose you can look at it a few ways, legally or culturally. Legally, sure, there's the aspect of states having some amount of control over their own laws, but this tends to only cover specifics and relatively minor stuff in the grand scheme of things, with the country's law taking precedence in most cases. Culturally, there is a fair difference between states, but I still see the overall US cultural identity as stronger than the variations between different states. There's a far greater difference in cultures between, say, countries in Europe than states in the US. And even within a fairly small country like the UK, I'd say there's just as much of a range in cultures across the country as there is across the US. Just taking the phrase United States of America literally would suggest exactly that. The word state means country/nation/territory organized politically under a government. America is the landmass, that is North America/South America. So yeah, there are 50 states that are united, as if they are a single one ruled under another big government, and they all happen to be in America. France is a state, and Poland is a state, and Canada is a state. They just aren't among the united ones of America. Canada is 100% this. We are a bunch of provinces that hate each other so much that we'd rather burn the whole country down than see another province get the upper hand. But we don't want to be the first one to throw down the match, so we stew in our little boxes until the first motherfucker blinks. But our hatred makes us a really stable country. We hate and distrust each other so much that we would never let another province get the upper hand, so our government is in constant check and balance. Thank God for Quebec and Alberta being the constant rebel child, or we'd always been in some sort of stable union that would make us go to a two-party system. All of Canadian history can be summed up by our fuck. America is being fucky again. We'd better do something about it, to the point where we somehow became the second biggest nation out of spite of each other. This is true of most countries. I live in Germany, but Germany isn't just one country. There is a constitution, the basic law Grundgesetz, and federal laws passed by Congress. Then there are the state laws passed by the state governments. Then there are local regulations defined by the counties, cities, or town governments. Bavaria, for example, is a free state. The Bavarian leaders never signed the German basic law, but stated that they would accept it if 2/3 of the rest of the German states signed it. All other German states did sign it, so the law applies to Bavaria as well. But Bavaria still sees itself as somewhat more independent than other German states. Bavaria, for example, has a political party that is only active in that state, the CSU, that is associated with the CDU, that is active in all other German states. In the current German government, the CSU has several minister positions, even though it only represents one of 16 states in the country. Federal laws are the same across the country, but things like education and schools are in the responsibility of the state, so there are differences. The states try to align them as much as possible, but there are differences, because each state allocates different budgets for education. At the moment it's more like two countries with little pretense of unity. That sounds facetious, but I mean it. There have surely been few times in recent history when there has been such a clear and strong division of the country into two factions. It's been a perfect storm of many significant and controversial current events churning up the population with a highly divisive president in the White House. Regardless of whether you like Trump or not, I think that most people would agree that he has whipped up an unprecedented interest in national politics, and I would suggest that he's done that in a way that has driven a massive wedge between the left and right. I can see why an American might agree with this statement, but for me, as a non-American, I really do not agree. America, or rather the United States of, could have been 50 countries, and have been much like Europe in a sense, but it isn't. It is one country. While there is definitely local culture that is different between state to state, there is still a very strong cohesion under the American flag. Americans are extremely nationalistic, to levels that are fucking absurd to people outside USA. You literally see more American flags before exiting the airport. After landing than you would see Swedish flag after spending a full year here. USA is very much one country. It's so insanely horny for its own flag and its symbolism that even implying it's 50 countries masquerading as one just make you sound silly tbh. Are there differences between the states? Yeah, but that holds true for other countries too when comparing different parts of the same country. In economics, there are various forms of unions of countries, states, from free trade union up to customs union, then economic union, then political union. The USA is a political union, as is, increasingly, the European Union transitioning into. Each state has its own identity, laws, and autonomy. A state, and not the individual people in it, elects a president. Some states have high taxes and high access to services, others have low taxes and minimal services. The USA federal government uses federal taxes to a. Defend the country, b. Provide support to individual states to improve interstate commerce, and c. Provide assistance when needed to the states. The federal government must be careful in how it passes laws as to not violate the Constitution that limits its power, and thus influences law more through money than code. For example, the legal drinking alcohol age is not a matter of federal law, per se, but the federal government can withhold 10% of federal highway funds to states that do not set the drinking age at 21. On the international level, however, nowhere is wrong. The USA is one state for the purposes of international relations. Some of the individual states might engage with countries to promote trade and travel, but they do so within the boundaries of federal law. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit like. If you would like to see more, feel free to subscribe.